Okay, you ready for a message?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to take this off because I just
Okay.
can't talk.
Yeah.
And we've created a distance with us. So.
Yeah.
I don't know when it happened in your life. Maybe you were a baby, you probably don't remember. But I want you to think about how it's controlled you for the last, well, in my case, it's 50 years. Over 50 years. But when it did happen, you were absolutely fascinated by it. It was the first time you ever seen yourself in the mirror. And you see little babies look at themselves and you wonder what it is they're thinking because they're in wonder. We were startled and shocked, maybe confused. Who is this person looking at me? And then what made the mirror really fascinating was when it dawned on us, I'm looking at myself in the mirror. That's what really fascinates a child, when they reach that point when they know it's them they're looking at. The mirror becomes increasingly important in your life. Whether you're going to school, or you're going to work, or going on a date, or maybe you're getting ready to get married. The mirror becomes important to you. The one thing we make sure we do before we leave the house every day is we take that quick last glance to make sure everything's in place before we start our day. The reason that we do it is this. The mirror, your reflection, will never lie to you.
Yeah.
Every time you see it, you're going to see exactly who you are when you look in the mirror. You don't have to wonder. It's going to show you what you look like when you have makeup on, but it's also going to show what you look like when you have no makeup on. It's going to show what you look like when you're clean shaven, and it's going to show what it looks like when you're not clean shaven. When every hair is in place, or every hair is all over the place, it's going to show exactly who you are. There is nothing fake or hidden when you look at yourself in the mirror. Today we're going to begin a series for the next 4 weeks. And this is an opportunity for us to look in the mirror as we go through these new regulations and restrictions, how we can apply Christian principles into our Christian living. These principles are governed by qualities that Christians display and have displayed all well into the Bible record. And we're going to learn that this next few weeks. What we're talking about, really analyzing, is not what you see physically. What we want to analyze together is what we see spiritually and morally when we look into this mirror at ourselves. We're going to be talking about the most important thing about all of us. It's the most important thing about you, and it's called your character. That's what we're going to talk about for 4 weeks, unless something else comes up. But that's our plan. Now, what do you see when you look in the mirror right now? I don't mean what you see on the outside, but if your mirror were to reflect your inside, what would you see? What should you see in the mirror if you were to see your character clearly? We're living in a day where people are far more concerned about their reputation than they are about their character, right? It's true. And the latter is not always a true reflection of the former. Your reputation is what people think you are, and what they see you through a window. Character is different. Character is what you know you are when you see yourself in the mirror. It has been said that people are like trees. People are like trees. The shadow is the reputation of the tree. But the fruit of the tree, for example, that would be the personality of the tree. But the root of the tree, the root of it, is what? Character. It's what creates this tree. It's character. Abraham Lincoln said it this way. Before we get into our first scripture, Abraham Lincoln said, character is like a tree and reputation is like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of it, but the tree is the real thing. So I have a question to ask you. If your reputation met your character on the street, your reputation and your character, would they recognize each other? Is that reputation what people see close and similar to that character? Your root? What makes up good character? What would be the character traits that would be true of you if your character was not just good? Or if your character was not just what you would like it to be, but what God wanted it to be? What would your character look like then? If it was like what you would expect it to look like, if it was a character from God as you displayed it in your life. I want to submit to you that the first trait that would be real in your life, the first thing that people will know about you, if you truly have the right character, is a quality we're going to talk about for a few minutes today. That character is integrity. Integrity. Think in your mind what you think about integrity. What does the word mean to you right now? If you were building a house made of a character, the foundation of that house would be the integrity. The character is made up of a bunch of qualities, right? The foundation of a house would be integrity. You've heard, there's an expression that says, everything rises and falls on leadership. Okay? You could add to that, leadership rises and falls on integrity. Integrity is a root foundation of a person's character. Okay? That develops our conversation for the next few minutes as we get into this series. Even more to the point, you won't have hardly any of the other character traits if you don't have integrity. If you don't have this foundation, you're not going to have the other qualities we're going to talk about, like faith, honesty. Those are other qualities of a good character. But integrity, it's our first one because it's the foundation. It's the foundation of what God expects of us today. Okay. What you accomplish will make your name known, but your integrity will determine whether your name is worth knowing. Do you follow that? Whether it's worth knowing. That's how important your integrity is. Today we're going to study a man who I believe that God's going to do a work in our hearts, because I believe this man was the epitome of the word integrity in the Bible. It is because of his integrity that we know who he was and why he was or has a book in the Bible. I believe it's his integrity that made that happen. And that's why God put him in there for us. His name was Daniel. Daniel. Now, anyone familiar with the Bible, immediately when you hear the word Daniel, you think of what?
The lion's den.
The lion's den. How many of you thought of the lion's den as soon as I mentioned Daniel? Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, since I was a kid, if I hear Daniel, I think of one thing. The lion's den. He was the guy that was tossed into the lion's den. That's what I remember. Now, this account of Daniel's life was found in the 6th chapter of Daniel. What is important about this story is not, I want you to get this. When you leave here today, I don't want this to be what you think of first when it comes to Daniel. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. That's what you think of when you hear Daniel. When you leave here today, I want you to think of something else. I hope this stays with you. Okay? Here's why. What is important about his story is not that he was thrown into the lion's den. It is what happened before Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. The lion's den is part of the account, but I want this to change with you. I want you to start remembering what he did before this happened. Because if you could remember this act of integrity that he showed, it will help you in your foundation today. You'll see why that's so important when we examine this together. It's going to teach us 3 tremendous truths about integrity, why it's so important, and why you got to have it. Okay? Good to go? All right. Let's open our Bibles to Daniel chapter 6. If you can stand for the scripture, please do so on our first reading here. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6, and we're going to read in verse 2. 1 and 2. Just let me know when you have it. Say amen.
She's going to help me.
Okay. Daniel chapter 2. It comes after Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then Daniel. This will lay a foundation for the rest of the story. And I think you're going to enjoy this.
Daniel what?
Daniel chapter 6.
Verse 2, right?
I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. This will set the stage for us. Okay, we read it. Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Let's go ahead and read 3 also, since we're there. And we'll be reading a few more here and there. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. All right. You can have a seat. Okay, again, we think of Daniel, we automatically go to the lion's den. But the reason he was thrown into the lion's den is more important than the fact that he was thrown into the den in the first place. We forget sometimes what got him into the lion's den to begin with, right? I don't know how many times as a child I heard this story, but do you know when I think of Daniel, that's pretty much all I think about is the lion's den. Here in the verses we read that Darius, who's the king, he was set to appoint 120 satraps, which are government rulers, to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was David. The satraps were made accountable so that the king might not suffer loss. Okay, so in these verses we find out that this king, he sets up these men to govern his kingdom. David is part of that. David would be kind of like one of the CFOs. He's one of the chief officers. He really helps to account for all of the, probably the riches, the finances of the government. No doubt the king needs someone he can trust. The king of the empire at this time was a pagan by the name of Darius. Evidently, he suspected that some of the people under him were not only not doing their word faithfully, but they were embezzling money. Okay? So the king's really confused. So he sets up these governances of men. The empire was so vast that he knew he had to surround himself with the best people to ensure honesty and accountability. He knew you're no better than the people you surround yourselves with. And King Darius was pretty smart. And it was critical that he find the best men to set into these positions to oversee his kingdom affairs. There was one choice that was obvious. There was one choice that was obvious to the king. And that choice was Daniel, as we read in verse 3. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps. Satraps were described, when I looked it up, as governors throughout the kingdom. So he distinguished himself among these administrators and these rulers, these officials, that Darius was going to use him. Now, Daniel is about 85 years old when this happened.
Really?
Yeah. So start picturing him in your mind. I looked at pictures while I was studying this, and some pictures have Daniel as a very young man,
Yeah.
and some pictures show him as an older man. But in this position, he was actually 85 years old when I studied this
Is that
information.
right? I didn't know that.
Daniel is about 85 years old. He's been serving the Lord in Babylon for over 70 years. And he is now under his third king. He's kind of the new kid on the block with King Darius. It could be likely that Darius never even met Daniel. We're not sure at that point. But though not everybody knew Daniel, everybody knew about Daniel. If you read the book of Daniel, you would know that Daniel's reputation preceded him. For 7 decades, Daniel proved himself to be a man of absolute, complete, impeccable integrity. Daniel was put in charge of everyone else and was second in command only to the king. Now, integrity is the cream that always rises to the top, right? Integrity trumps ability all the time. There is no limit to how far anyone can go if they know they can always be trusted to do the right thing. In fact, if you get into business and you start interviewing people, there's one quality that you look for above everything else. Your questions when you question people for the job lead to one special quality. I think for the last 3 interviews I've been on in business, these questions have been obvious. And these questions are related to integrity. He was not promoted because of his seniority or because of his moral superiority. His character was a cut above everyone else, and we're going to see that. It was his integrity that got him in trouble. It's a good quality, but it's a quality that comes at a cost. Okay? Now, verse 4 says this. Now listen closely. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Okay. Well, how does that apply to our story? What is it they were trying to do? There was evidently, at this time, there was kind of what we call a good old boy network there among the kingdom that had been skimming off the top from the king. And they knew those days were over as long as Daniel was at the top. He was second, right? So these good old boys that were skimming from the top news, they had to do something if they were going to keep this up. They all knew that Daniel was an outsider. He was a foreigner, an immigrant, and a Jew. And they could not stand the thought of him being over them. So, they launch a full, all-out investigation. Not because they had a reason, but because they really, truly wanted to find something against him. So they all started this huge investigation. They investigated everything. They went into all details of Daniel's life. They literally threw the kitchen sink at him. They put a tail on him, so to speak. They hired private investigators, if it was today. They bugged his telephone if they would have had telephones. They analyzed his tax records, if it was current today. They examined his bank statements. They interviewed people who went to high school and college with him, right? Every detail of Daniel's life, they jumped in there and they worked it from every angle they could. What did they find? Nothing. Nada. Zero. They brought in the FBI and the CIA. Well, they didn't have FBI and CIA then. But they brought in whatever they could. The IRS, whatever. And they ordered them to turn over every rock, for every bed, every drawer, every closet they could. They couldn't lay a glove on him. Nada. Anything that could cut Daniel down to size. But after putting him under the microscope, all they found was a man who for 70 years had been honest, hardworking, and holy. How was that case closed? How was that closed? Well, finally, the record here in verse 5 indicates that they finally said, all these men, they got together and said, you know what? There's nothing. There's nothing against him. We can't find nothing. We're not gonna find anything against him. Oh. But in verse 5, this is what they say. We're not going to find anything against this man unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Isn't that amazing? How many of us think of that when it comes to Daniel? I bet you will next time. I want you to next time. What a testimony to be able to say about somebody that they couldn't find anything wrong. Your only hope is to do something spiritually to this guy. That's what they said. We got to do something that involves us God. Otherwise, we have nothing. And they did. They did it. They did it to him. You will see when you live a life of integrity, life becomes surrounded with a force field of righteousness and goodness that can withstand anything. It's true. Even in the worst of circumstances. You get kind of a way about you where you can take it. Right up to death. I've seen it. And it's amazing to see. You are free to exercise this quality called integrity. But integrity is never free to exercise. You see that? You're free to exercise it. But it's not free because it's going to cost something. And it costs us. If anything, this is an expression you've probably heard. If anything counts, it is going to cost. Right? If it doesn't count, it's probably not worth it. If it doesn't cost, it's probably not worth it. Because you got to work, you got to pay for something to get something, right? If you know the story of Daniel, this was not his first rodeo when it came to integrity. But this would prove to be the most costly demonstration of integrity for him. Okay. Here's what happens. Verses 6 through 8. So the administrators and satraps went as a group to the king, and they said, May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, this is from my translation, I'm using yours, might say something a little different, but similar. Advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, to the king, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree. Put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians. Whatever the king says cannot be changed. Cannot be repealed. You got to give these men credit. They came up with a plan that seemed like it was going to work. Darius, the king, he liked Daniel. And before he even realized what had just happened, he signs a decree. Amazing, right? They were brilliant. Brilliant is not always a good thing. Right? They had just checkmated Daniel. Checkmate. And since they knew they would find nothing immoral and unethical, they decided to make his faith illegal. Daniel didn't hide the fact that he prayed 3 times a day. He didn't hide it. He would get on his knees and pray. He didn't hide his prayer. He didn't hide the fact that he prayed to the only God that there is, even if it was different than theirs. They passed this law with only one person in mind, Daniel. Because they knew if they made prayer to Daniel's God illegal, this is what he would have. He would have a 24-karat gold-plated printed reservation to the lion's den. Right?
Yeah.
They knew it. How could they be so sure it was going to work? How did they know? How did they know that it was going to pan out just like that? Well, it was easy for them, and here's how. They knew Daniel. For 7 decades, when it came to integrity, Daniel's report card was nothing but straight A's. That's how they knew. Not just A's, A pluses. 100%. Every test was graded 100 for Daniel. They knew Daniel would not fold. They knew Daniel was going to die. They understood how Daniel made every decision in his life. Do you understand where this is going for you? They knew what was important to Daniel. They knew how he made every decision in his life. And how did he do it? Any thoughts? How did he make his decisions? He prayed and through God, right? Those were the important things for him. Okay. Theodore Hesborough, former president of the University of Notre Dame. This is what he said. My basic principle is you don't make decisions because they're easy. You don't make them because they're cheap. You don't make them because they're popular. You make them because they're right. Though the king thought Daniel had been involved in the decision. See, the king, he thought Daniel was part of the group. He thought he was part of the group. I don't think the king would have ever made that decree had he thought Daniel was not a part of that.
Yeah.
Those men lied. Daniel knew nothing about it. So we read in verse 10, now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published. So Daniel didn't know, right, the decree before. He just found out about it. He found out what this decree was. The rubber had just hit the road for Daniel, so to speak, in Daniel's faith. And it's really kind of sad. He had offered a lifetime of honesty and decency. Think about it. And godly integrity in government service. He had served faithfully and loyally under every king. This was his third king. He always had done what was best for others. And what did he get for it? A gold watch? A house down on Main Street? What did he get? A brand new car? A beautiful raise? A severance package? Nope. This is what he faced. The loss of a position, his security, his income, his friends, and his own life. And I'm going to say this again. You are free to exercise integrity. But it is not cheap to exercise integrity. Mm-hmm. You need to remember this. If you're watching or over here, remember this. Integrity is not so you can get what you want to have or go where you want, but to be who you ought to be. That's what integrity is for. Daniel was going to do whatever he did next with his eyes wide open, knowing full well the cost of what's going to happen. Daniel, whatever choice Daniel made now, because he was aware of it, he was going to make his next step knowing exactly what was going to happen to him. There was no secret. What's he going to do? He came through just like his enemies thought he would. No secret. He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. And in verse 10, I'm just going to read it because I think it's fascinating. And this is what I want you to remember that he did when you think of Daniel. Chapter 6 and verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went to his house, and his windows being open in the chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Just like he did before. It's exactly what Daniel did. Now, how does that make you feel when you read that? Are you thinking in your mind, oh no, Daniel, they're going to hear you from the window. Daniel, what are you doing? Oh, Daniel, you're praying and they told you not to pray. He did things just like he did before. That's the kind of man he was when it came to his relationship with God. Nobody ordered Daniel to pray, and nobody was going to order Daniel not to pray. Now, a simple question for all of us that has to be asked. We got to ask ourselves this question: what would we have done? You know, Daniel had a few options, really. Let me just ask you, what could Daniel have done? What could he have done?
Not pray.
He could have said, you know what? I'm not going to pray. Right? What else could he have done?
Gave up.
Could have given up, maybe. Right? Spent his whole life working so hard. He could have been secret. Right?
Yeah.
He could have shut the windows, made sure he only prayed in silence. But would that have been fair to God?
No.
But he did. He had options. He could have played it safe. He could have quit praying. How long was this restriction? What did it say? How many days? How many days? 30? Does that sound familiar?
It was one day, wasn't it?
Nope. It was 30 days.
30 days?
It was a 30-day restriction. Okay, so here's Daniel, and he's told, you know, the decree was anybody that gives praise to any other, right? Anything else other than to the king, within a 30-day period, if they find out, they're going into the lion's den. Let's do it. And Darius said, okay. All he had to do was wait for 30 days. How many of us have went through 30 days without a prayer? I bet you a few people have went 30 days without a prayer. Just 30 days, come on. But the account records that Daniel had so much integrity, his foundation was so strong, that he did just as he had done before. He could have laid in bed at night and prayed silently. But I got to tell you this, and I want you to think about this because we're being restricted. And it could be some serious restrictions coming up. You have to think at this point, as we develop our series, how would you react in some cases? Integrity does not go with the flow. Integrity does not go on vacation. Integrity never takes a break. Integrity never calls time out. Integrity never takes a pass. It doesn't go with the flow. It doesn't follow the crowd. Integrity stands its ground. It doesn't listen to polls, right? Integrity lives for principles. That's what integrity does. Do you see why we chose integrity as the first part of this series? This is going to be your foundation through COVID restriction as a Christian. This does not mean we do not comply. Understand, I'm not trying to, become a resistance in our church. All right. But what I'm telling you is that there is a time in a Christian's life when you have to say, wait a second. They said, what? I can't pray? No, I'm going to pray. Okay? Because we have integrity just like those early saints did in the Bible. We have integrity. Integrity may leave you alone because we find out in verse 13, Daniel is the only one that is charged. He's the only one charged. Nobody else. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, remember Daniel, right? They said, he pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays, King Darius, come on. Daniel is still praying 3 times a day. Whenever you are told to stand down and instead you decide to stand up, you will stand out and you may stand alone and you will become a target. Talk is cheap. Integrity never just talks the talk. It walks the walk. It's the same in business. It's the same in your families. It's the same with the way that you treat your partner. Integrity takes a stand. It never takes a shortcut. It never cuts corners. It never veers off course. It stands tall. It stands tough. And it stands for what is right. We're a church. And so those qualities are important to us. That lead to the last thing we need to say about integrity. Let's get into the last part of this before we close. Okay? The last part of the story. The traitors turn tattletale. So they run to the king to present their case. And this is what they say. Between the verses of 11 and 16, this is the final part of the story. And this is the one that you're more familiar with. These men go as a group and they find Daniel praying. They probably were stalking his house They're probably somewhere down below in the bushes, down there underneath the window, and they probably have a runner. I don't know. Maybe there's a runner, and he runs and tells the group, come on down here right now. He is praying right now. That could be what happened. I don't know. But that's what I'm thinking happened.
Yeah.
So they went to the king and they spoke to him, and this is what they said. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? And the king says, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, and cannot be repealed. Then, now this is the moment where they say to Darius, the king, Daniel's the one. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. No attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you are put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, the Bible says in these verses, he was greatly distressed. He didn't know. He didn't know what their plan was. He was determined. He wanted to rescue Daniel. He wanted to rescue him. And he made every effort until sundown to do it, trying to figure out a way to do this. Then the men went as a group to King Darius. They go back to him and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him in the den. It was just like that. Darius didn't want to do that. But he was impelled because of his binding with the law. I almost want to say it kind of broke his heart maybe a little bit. But kings will be kings, right? So the king gives the order, they brought Daniel, they throw him into the den, and the king says to Daniel, and I don't think he was being facetious. I think that king was really hoping that Daniel's God could save him. The king says to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually, may the God that you serve continually rescue you. Pretty high price to pay for a lifetime of integrity, huh? It's not going to be quick like a lethal injection. I just want to say a couple things here about lions. A lion's den death is not pretty. If you were to go to Africa and you've seen lions up close, they'd be terrifying to you up close. A lion's roar can be heard up to 5 miles away. 5 miles away. If you've ever stood near a lion when he roars, it sounds like a giant bass speaker vibrating through your body. They don't call him the king of the jungle for nothing. Right? A hungry lion can eat 30% of his body weight in one sitting. One lion. That would be like an average person eating 200 quarter-pound hamburgers for lunch. Even I couldn't do that. Unless I hadn't eaten for a couple days, maybe. I might be able to. No man is a match, not even Tarzan, really, because an average lion possesses the strength of 14 men. I hadn't known that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Now you have to feel for Daniel. You would think after 70 years of faithfulness and godliness, an 85-year-old man would not be going out this way at the end of his life. That is the price you pay for integrity. Because you never outgrow integrity, and you never get too old to do what is right. Daniel pays the ultimate price for being thrown into the lion's den to face a horrific death. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Daniel was delivered from the lion's den. If you keep reading, that's true. Daniel was delivered from the lion's den. He was delivered from the lion's den. In fact, I just want to read, because of this whole incident, in chapter 7, verse 25, it says, "Then King Darius wrote unto all the nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you all. I make a decree." Now he's making his own decree. "That in every dominion of my kingdom, men terrible and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom for which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian." That was the king's response. So yes, Daniel was delivered. That's true. But I purposely went through that story at this point. I purposely stopped at verse 16. Purposely. Why? Why did I stop before his deliverance? Think about it. There was a reason. I want you to imagine this is where the story stops. Before his deliverance. Because not everybody that gets thrown into the lion's den comes out alive. I want this to hit you. Yes, God delivered Daniel. But not everybody who makes decisions based on integrity comes out alive. We know the stories of those old Bible saints who were beheaded. We know them. The only way you will ever maintain your integrity is when you make the same decision he made. It wasn't about the deliverance. It was about his integrity. You see that now? When you make the same decision he makes, that's the only way you're going to maintain your integrity. He was willing to die. He was willing to die. You've got to make it every day before you get out of bed. You got to make it before you go to school. You got to make it your decision you're going to do it. You got to make up your mind that your integrity is more important than your safety, your security, your prosperity, and your popularity. When it comes to God, because God, he will rescue you, even if you think it's the end. And I'm talking death. And I believe that with all my heart. I will live again. At the end of the day, there is one question you should always be able to answer. One question, 100% in the affirmative. It is not in keeping with our discussion and our series for this one. It is not, did I do things right? But rather, did I do the right thing? You can do a lot of things right, but they might not be the right thing to do. Now let's bring it to a close. 600 years later, a story very similar to this took place. Verse 17, I'm just going to read it to you. Verse 17 says, "A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den." Sound familiar? "The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not have changed." They rolled that huge stone over so that he couldn't escape. There was no chance for him. He was thrown into a cave. A stone is rolled across the entrance. Soldiers are placed there to guard the cave, and it is sealed. That's what happened to Daniel. Does that sound familiar? Another man faced death like Daniel, except he wasn't thrown into a lion's den. He was nailed to a cross. Daniel didn't know whether he would live or die. Daniel didn't know. But this man knew he was going to die. We know, of course, that Daniel was delivered from death. But this man was delivered through death. Right?
Amen.
Daniel didn't die. He came out alive. But this man died, but he came back to life.
Amen.
Both faced what they faced because of their integrity. We're talking about Jesus. Technically, Daniel, he was guilty because he broke the law, technically. Jesus was guilty because we broke the law. And there was only one other big difference. Daniel was guilty because he had broken men's law. Jesus was guilty because we broke God's law. Jesus had made a promise before he even came to the planet Earth that he would follow through with his Father's will and do the right thing and die for us so that we could live through him. Because of his integrity. Because of his integrity. That's exactly what we can do. So, there is a cost to consider and there is a price to pay for it. Integrity. When you do the cost-benefit analysis, which we do in business a lot, you hear that a lot. The benefits outweigh the cost. Because when you are a person of integrity, you never have to fear accusations or investigations. People can go through your life and you have nothing to hide, so you live a life of integrity. Because when those times come that you are put under the microscope, and they will come, all anybody will see is the light of integrity shining in your heart and the fire of purity burning in your soul. And that's our message. I want you to transition those thoughts as you think about it into where we're at today under restriction. We want to comply, but we also want to make sure that we're worshiping God. We want to make sure that if there's any possibility or way that we can come to church, we come to church. Because it's what we always did. We can do it. And if the time comes where this disease is so huge we can't even come to church at all, we will church together online. As some churches are doing now. We're sending those messages out and we pray that you listen to them. Okay. We'll leave you with those thoughts. Amen?
Amen.
Okay. So we are blessed to be here.